What if the timeline we trust is not the one we're actually living in? What if history didn't just unfold, but followed a pattern so precise, so deliberate, that once you see it, you can't unsee it? And what if that pattern was written down thousands of years ago, not as myth, not as metaphor, but as a warning? There is a reason this matters now, because for most of human history, prophecy was something distant, something abstract. But today, something feels different. The world moves faster, systems are more connected, events feel less random, and for the first time, ancient descriptions of global order, control, and transformation don't sound impossible anymore. They sound familiar, almost uncomfortably real. Long before modern nations, before digital networks, before global economies, there were texts that attempted to map time itself, not just history, but the structure of history, the idea that events repeat, that empires rise and fall in cycles, that human behavior follows predictable patterns, and that at certain moments, everything converges. One of the most discussed examples comes from ancient prophetic writings that describe a sequence of kingdoms, not just political powers, but symbols of human dominance across time, each one rising, expanding, collapsing: gold, silver, bronze, iron, each representing strength, but also fragility. Because no matter how powerful the system became, it always broke. Why would ancient writers focus so heavily on cycles? Why emphasize repetition instead of randomness? Because repetition suggests design, and design suggests intention. There are also descriptions of a final phase, a time when power becomes more unified, when systems that were once separate begin to merge. Political authority, economic control, cultural influence, all blending into something more centralized, not through conquest alone, but through agreement, dependency, and necessity. At the time these words were written, such a level of global integration was impossible. There was no infrastructure, no communication network, no shared system. But today, we are watching the world move in that exact direction. Global finance is interconnected. A crisis in one region affects the entire planet. Technology links billions of people in real time. Decisions made in one place ripple across continents instantly. And slowly, almost quietly, systems are becoming more unified. Is that progress, or is it alignment? Ancient timelines also describe a shift in human behavior, a growing focus on self, a decline in trust, a rise in conflict, not just between nations, but within societies. Division becomes the norm, truth becomes harder to define, and people begin to rely more on systems than on each other. Look around. Does that sound distant? Or does it feel current? But here is where it becomes more unsettling. Because these texts don't just describe systems, they describe moments, specific transitions, points where everything changes. And these moments are often marked by signs, not supernatural displays, but observable shifts. Economic instability, social unrest, technological breakthroughs that redefine human capability. We are living through all of these at once. Artificial intelligence is reshaping how information is created and controlled. Digital currencies are redefining value in exchange. Surveillance capabilities are expanding beyond anything imagined just decades ago. And with each advancement, the line between convenience and control becomes harder to see. Ancient writers didn't use the language of algorithms or data, but they described a world where influence becomes invisible, where control is not always enforced, but accepted, where systems become so integrated into daily life that opting out feels impossible. Hidden in plain sight. That is the phrase that keeps appearing when you study these patterns. Not hidden in secrecy, not locked away, but visible if you know where to look. The timeline was never erased. It was preserved, studied, repeated, and yet, most people never follow it to its conclusion. Why? Because the conclusion is uncomfortable. It suggests that history is not just a record of what happened, but a roadmap of what will happen. That the same forces that shaped ancient empires are still active today. That human nature has not changed, and that the systems we build eventually shape us in return. There's also a warning embedded in these timelines, not a threat but an observation, that as systems grow more powerful, individuals often become less aware that complexity creates dependency, and dependency creates vulnerability. So, the question is not just whether the timeline is real. The question is where we are on it. Are we at the beginning of another cycle? Somewhere in the middle? Or are we approaching one of those convergence points? where everything accelerates. Because if we are, then what comes next is not random. It follows the pattern. Empires don't collapse overnight. They weaken slowly, through overreach, through internal division, through loss of identity, and then suddenly the shift becomes visible. What once seemed stable starts to crack. At the same time, new systems emerge, more efficient, more connected, more capable, promising stability, offering solutions, but also introducing new forms of control. And people accept them. Not because they are forced to, but because they feel necessary. This is how transitions happen. Not through chaos alone, but through order. And this is where the ancient timeline becomes impossible to ignore. Because it doesn't just describe collapse, it describes replacement, a restructuring of power, a redefinition of how society operates. A new phase. For some, this is progress. For others, it is loss. And for those who study the patterns, it is confirmation. The timeline continues. But here is the most important part. These writings never remove human choice. They describe patterns, but they also imply awareness. The idea that recognizing the pattern changes how you respond to it. Because once you see the cycle, you are no longer just inside it. You are observing it. And observation creates distance. Distance creates clarity. And clarity creates the possibility of action. So, what does that mean for the future? It means that the events unfolding around us are not isolated. They are connected. Part of something larger. Something that has been building for a very long time. It means that the systems we rely on today may not exist in the same form tomorrow. And it means that understanding the past is not just about knowledge. It is about preparation, because the timeline doesn't stop. It moves forward, always. The only question is whether we move with it blindly or with awareness. And if this pattern is real, if these cycles are repeating, then we are not just witnessing history. We are standing inside it. Right now. This is not just information. This is a signal. And once you hear it, you can't go back to silence.